welcome to the latest episode of the foXnoMad podcast. Welcome to the annual Halloween episode. I am really excited for this one. I love doing these episodes every year. One of my favorites. We talk about ghost stories, the paranormal, and today I've got a great guest for you. My guest is John Waldron. He's here from DC Ghost to talk about ghosts from the Washington, DC and Baltimore areas. It is Halloween. We are right there at Halloween, and we've also got an election coming up. And wouldn't you believe it, there are some election ghost stories specific to this cycle in the US, election cycle in the US. So I think you're going to be really interested. I think you're going to be really sort of creeped out. I think you're going to hear some things that you might not have a good explanation for. All in this episode with John Waldron. There we go. Hi, John. Thanks for being
Hi.
on the podcast. Um, it is Halloween coming up. Like I was telling you before we hit record, this is one of the most popular episodes of the podcast every year. It's one of my favorite because I just love talking about weird, creepy, unusual stories, and there seems to be so many great ones. So thanks for taking the time to do this. I just wanted to ask you a little bit about your background, how you got involved with DC Ghosts and ghost lore in general.
Absolutely. I have a theater background. Went to Virginia Commonwealth University, but I've always been very interested and fascinated in history, especially growing up in the DC area. Going to DC quite a bit, learning the history, and then also much into the paranormal. Um, I used to go on many ghost tours myself, just taking in all the information. And it's also a great way to learn the history of each area. I remember going to the Alexandria tour, and then when I was in Florida, went on St. Augustine. And just it's always been fascinating. You get to learn you get to really know the area by the ghost stories.
And you mentioned DC, one of the oldest cities in the US. So I'm guessing a lot of good ghost stories, a lot of weird, unusual things. Do you have any favorites that are specific to the area?
There are so many. Well, on our tours that we take, we start off by the Treasury Building, and we then proceed to go through Lafayette Square, President's Park. In that particular area, in the park itself, right in front of the White House, between Jackson and Madison Street, there are so many different stories. There are so many events and occurrences that have happened in the past 200 some years in that area. And what's fascinating is the connection. Like there might be one story, but then it connects to a completely different story.
Hmm.
So that's why I love giving those tours.
And when you give a ghost related or I guess paranormal tour or ghost tour, what are people who join the tour, what are they looking for? Do they want to hear a great story? Are they actually looking to see, can I see something weird or hear something unusual? What is it like?
Usually both. Usually both, and it's you've got to really try. I've got to really try to gauge the crowd, because sometimes I'll have a lot of kids on the tour, and so I've got to try to downplay a little bit of the violence. Um, but then we'll get some really big ghost aficionados. They'll come out there with their equipment. Now we have ghost meters that we rent out, the EMF detectors. And I always like to bring them out, especially when we get to different spots on the tour. There are certain locations like the Blair House or the Decatur House where the meter will always jump up to red. And what those meters do is they detect it's the electromagnetic field, but it says that the spirits will emit some sort of energy.
And I'll give you two ends of the spectrum. Is there one ghost story? It doesn't have to be DC related. It can be anyone that you know of that you're like, okay, that one has a pretty good explanation for whatever is the sightings or the sound. And then I want you to compare that to one that maybe you're like, I really just don't have a good like logical explanation for X, Y, or Z.
Um, Sure. Now, one of the most popular of the stories that I tell is, and I usually finish with this story, but it's the story of the creature that lurks in DC. So you might be familiar with Mothman of West Virginia, or Demon Cat. I'm sorry. That's what I was about to say. We have Demon Cat in DC. We have our own creature. It goes by the initials DC. So there's Jersey Devil, and then we have Demon Cat. So the legend that goes back to when the Capitol is under construction, back in the early 1800s. So during that period of time, DC, is basically swampland. It is just swampland, and so they had to do swamps bring out rats. And as they were trying to clear that area, cheap, easy extermination were bringing in cats. So they brought in hundreds of cats there on the foundation of the Capitol building to clear out these rats. And so they say many of these cats were adopted, some stayed on as strays. Well, this particular one, DC, is said to be there for the eternity. DC is first seen around the late 1850s. And at the time, there was a guard on duty. The guards at this time were usually hired by their brothers, and their brothers were senators. And these gentlemen, this is maybe second or third job. And so before reporting for duty, these men would usually go to the bars. Now, over there in DC, right there on Pennsylvania Avenue, that area back in the 1800s, that was called Rum Row. It had all of your bars and all of your seedy hotels in that time period. So more often than not, before reporting for duty, these guards would knock back a couple over at some of the seedy bars there. One in particular, the Imperial Hotel, and then report for duty. So one night, this guard is on duty, and he happens to see this little cat walk up towards him. Some say it was a black cat. Some say it was a tabby. I like to think it was a black cat. So the thing is, as the cat starts walking up towards him, he notices something strange happening. He says the cat is growing. The cat begins to grow. It becomes larger and larger in size. So now, as it's just a few feet away from him, this cat has now grown to the size of a tiger. And as it gets even closer and closer to him, the cat has now gotten to the size of an elephant. So this gentleman sees this elephant-sized cat right above him. And so he does what, any normal person would if you have an elephant-sized cat upon you. He pulls out his pistol and he begins shooting at the creature. Well, that is said to just annoy the cat. And anyone with a cat knows they can be temperamental. So DC gets into pouncing position and proceeds to leap upon a man. Or as he explained it, explode. He said this creature just exploded through him. So then, afterwards, the story continues. There are other guards that report seeing Demon Cat. The next sighting of Demon Cat is Good Friday, 1865. Or right before Good Friday, 1865, that Thursday. There was another guard around the Capitol who sees that. Well, then on Good Friday, 1865, that was the day that Lincoln was shot and killed. Demon Cat was also seen almost around this date, around late October 1929. On October 29th, 1929, the stock market fell. Demon Cat was seen right before Kennedy's assassination. So they always say that Demon Cat appears before some tragic event in DC. And there is proof. They say there is proof of Demon Cat in the rotunda of the Capitol. There are seen in the old entrance, there can be seen paw prints. And when you take a tour with me, we go by the National Theater. And now they have their own spirit there. But I will show my guests what appear to be paw prints right there from either Demon Cat or possibly when Cats last toured last year.
Okay. No any recent sightings of Demon Cat? I just in case something terrible.
I know. So if you're in DC and you see just a cat wander by, be careful. Be careful, especially right now.
Now that one is interesting, right? Because you have people who are drinking, um, also a lot of cats running around. I could see how that story could evolve.
Well, and then the other thing with that was, okay, the guards then found out, if they report seeing, of course, he was drinking a little bit, but then if a guard talks about, seeing this cat, he would usually get off of work that night. So,
Ah,
yeah.
the
So
old
that's
Demon
the
Cat
one where
excuse.
there's a little bit of explanation.
Interesting. Now, is there one that you can't that it just seems so odd to you that you're like, I don't know, I don't have a really good explanation for that one, or one that just makes you wonder, like,
There are a couple now. I'm usually asked if I've had any experiences. Have I seen a ghost? And now I can't say I've actually seen anything physical, but there are several places that that are listed as some of the top haunted spots in DC. Even if you go to Wikipedia, you will see that they are listed there. One of those is the Stephen Decatur house. And there's a whole story and legend that goes there behind Stephen Decatur. Now I'll ask you, are you familiar with Stephen Decatur?
I'm not actually, no.
Nobody is. Nobody is. And that's
Good.
so I think my feeling is sometimes these spirits, they just want to be known. Back in his day, Stephen Decatur was a naval war hero. He fought during the War of 1812. He fought in Tripoli. I mean, he was well known, very well known, and his life is very much similar to Alexander Hamilton. In fact, Stephen Decatur's wife was once engaged to Aaron Burr. So I won't. So yeah, you take the tour. I'll give you more of the details. But so when we go to that spot, it is said that he still is in his house there on H Street, H and Jackson in DC. And the meters always jump up right around that area. One night I was doing a tour in that spot. When I was actually, a couple things happened when I first started doing these tours. There is a story that now he was shot. He fought in a duel and lost. He was shot in the pelvic region, severing his intestines. And what happened was he was brought back to his house, and he laid there dying for 3 days. It is said that at one point he grabbed his wife's hand and he said to her, I've never known that man could suffer such pain. And then the poor guy died. And so after that, it is said that his spirit still lingers in that spot. And one of the things that is said to occur is that people that go in there, and it's now used by the White House Historical Society. They use it for different functions. They have parties. Even C-SPAN, I believe, uses it for interviews. And there are several people that have said that they have had severe stomach pains when they've been inside the place. It has been reported that some have even been rushed to the hospital. So on my very first tour, I'm there. I'm given the story, and I had a feeling that I might have messed up on some of the details. That's why I always make sure I get all the facts and the figures right, all the dates. Because that night I woke up at 4 a.m, and I had just severe stomach pain. When I was 18 years old, I had a bowel obstruction. I had surgery for that. And that pain was very, very similar. Now, I will give you a little disclaimer. I probably shouldn't eaten the store-bought spinach pastries at 12 o'clock that night. But every night that I do a tour in front of the Decatur House, I always make sure that I give honor to Stephen Decatur, because he was a man of honor, of dignity. It is even said he built his house right there because he was looking to enter the presidency. He wanted to be close to the White House. And here is this man that has been forgotten by history. And like I said, he suffered almost the same fate as Alexander Hamilton. And yet nobody has written a musical about him. For shame.
Well, yeah, maybe like you said, maybe he's sticking around to remind people or to get that musical.
Now, on the other side of Lafayette Square, right across the way. Now, when you walk through that area, that's why I love going through there every night, because people are always asking about the buildings there. They're very reminiscent to how they would have looked in the 1800s. It was Jackie Kennedy who, during Kennedy's presidency, that she helped renovate that area. And so the buildings there, have that resemblance. Most of them now are used by the White House. Nobody lives in that spot. But right across the way, you have this one spot. And that's where I will tell you, I have had more strange experiences, because there's a particular statue that sits in the court, the National Courts building there. And during the tours, I'll give history about this particular statue. But there have been weird things. When I first started doing these stories, this was, let me see, I believe it was 2022, when I first started talking about this particular statue and where it's located. The first day that I took a group up there was around June, July. It started raining. It's not only that, we had one of those DC thunderstorms, and it just deluged right there. It just poured. I mean, I was drenched. And this was a pub crawl. So then we have to go to different locations, and I'm dripping wet. A couple weeks later, I didn't have a tour that night, but that was when, and you might have heard the story, lightning struck a tree in Lafayette Square, actually killing 4 people. So those are some of the weird things that happen.
Wow.
Those are some of the weird occurrences. So when I give a tour, I always make sure that I thank all the spirits.
You stay on their good side.
Yes, exactly.
Have you ever had somebody on the tour come up to you and say, I just saw something, or I heard something, or something weird happened while you were, or maybe afterward they came up to you and they said, hey, that I noticed something unusual?
Yes, yes. One of the places that that happens the most, and this is right next to where, close to where I was talking about. It's on Madison Street, there in D.C. It's at the corner, and that house is the Madison Cutts house. That is where Dolly Madison lived for her remaining years. So on a tour, I usually talk about the history of Dolly, how she was born, Dolly Payne. She married a man by the name of John Todd. They had two sons, and they both died. Her husband and son died very young. So she was left a widow. And once again, Aaron Burr kind of plays a part in our story. He introduced Dolly to James. Now, of course, Dolly was there during the War of 1812, and she, was said to help save some of the big heirlooms, the big famous painting of George Washington. And what's fascinating with that is after their house was burnt to the ground, I mean, the White House was burnt, was destroyed. So they needed a place to stay. So they end up going to, now this is on the ultimate tour. It's called the Octagon House. This is over by, it's close to the to the Corcoran Art Gallery. It's over on New York Avenue. And that's where the White House was temporarily during the rest of his presidency. But that spot in itself is said to be quite haunted. The man that owned it, John Taylor, had 15 children, and two of his daughters died mysteriously falling down his big spiral staircase. So they lay claim that when you walk in there, you can sometimes see the crumpled form of a young woman on the by the stairs. And they also say, since Dolly stayed there quite a bit, that she can be seen. Now, after Madison's presidency, Dolly and James, they moved back to Montpelier. When James Madison dies, everything is given to her son. But unfortunately, he drank and gambled and was in debtor's prison quite a bit. So Dolly is quite poor at this time. Friends gathered together to help bring Dolly back to D.C. The house that she lived in for the remainder of her life, that was her sister and brother-in-law. They lived there. And then they move out and let Dolly stay there. So that becomes her spot. That is where, as she there for her later years, some of the first ladies at the time will walk up and talk to her, get advice. And when she dies, she always loved to sit on the front porch. And this front porch extended all the way out. And so when she died, the gentleman that bought the house after her, he completely destroyed, took out her porch. And so in that spot, they say there are more people that send me pictures. There are more people on my tours that send me pictures of the windows. And they see images of Dolly that they can sometimes, they'll say they see her looking out the window. And I've got a couple that they've sent me. When I was first, learning the tours, I remember the guide that I was working with, a woman came up to her and she said, Dolly's here right now. And Dolly knows what you're doing. Dolly likes what you're doing. And in fact, during my tours, one of the things that I do is if somebody has a birthday, because Dolly Madison, as you might know, brought ice cream to the White House. She was one of the first ones to bring ice cream, and of course, ice cream and birthdays. So we will sing happy birthday to that person, and I will hold up the meter while we're singing. And not always. Now, it doesn't always happen, because she might be busy elsewhere. But more often than not, that meter will turn red while we're singing happy birthday.
Wow. Wow. That's yeah, pretty interesting. Do you ever get yourself creeped out, or like do you ever go, this is something really weird, or maybe I'm having
Oh
ghosts
yes,
follow me or something?
yes, yes. I mean, it gets quite intense. Now, I give tours not only in DC but also in Baltimore. I live sort of in between. And one night in over in Baltimore, Fells Point, I had a guest. They brought with them one of the spirit boxes. You know, these are they will emit sounds and the radio waves, and they'll determine the words that are coming out of it. And so this particular spirit box that night formed three words, or there were a couple words, but three that really kind of struck in my head. Um, First, it was the word pier, and we're over at Fells Point, right by the harbor, right by the water. So of course, there's piers. And then as we're walking along, it said John, my name. So that was a little strange. That was a little strange. And then it had my wife's name, said her name. And what is fascinating is that was where we first met, was in Fells Point. So yes, I was getting a little creeped out that night. And my wife always tells me before the end of a tour, just for to thank the spirits and ask them, just please leave. Just thank you, and now you may go on. As I did that, I'm walking by to my car, and I walk by a garage. Sure enough, there was a loud thump that came out of that garage just as I walked by it. So I quickly got out of Fells that night.
Wow. Yeah, well, at Baltimore, classic ghost city, ghost town.
Yes.
Obviously, Edgar Allan Poe connection there as well.
Oh yes, oh yes. During the regular tours and the pub crawls, we go to the spot. We go to the bar that he was last seen at, that he had his last drink, and yeah, we've. I'll do tours inside there, and there's a spot right inside that they leave just there for Poe.
Oh, that's super cool.
Yes.
Where are some of the places people can find you enjoying the tours and actually see these places and hopefully have nice encounters with spirits?
Oh yes, yes, yes. Um, where I'm with U.S. Ghost Adventures, and so if you go on that site, we have locations all over. And but I do the tours. I'm in Baltimore. I'm in Fells Point and Washington D.C. I give both the regular tours and then the pub crawls in both spots. And then there's also several uh, guest houses that we have. We have the Brick House in Gettysburg. In fact, my wife and I stayed there just a month ago for our 4-year anniversary, and didn't see anything, but there was some intensity there.
I guess kind of a good thing and a bad thing, right? Like depending on yeah, if you want
Yes,
to.
yes.
Now, I guess as we wrap up,
I
just
don't think she would have liked if they came out. Yes.
yeah, yeah, that would. I think hotel room ghost is probably the scariest ghost, right? Like where you just most
Well,
panic.
that on our tours in both DC and Baltimore, we do. We have the Hotel Ghost in Baltimore. We have the Admiral Fell Inn, and that location is supposed to be one of the third most haunted spots on the East Coast. There are several stories there. There's one story where there was a doctor who was attending Johns Hopkins. He wakes up in the middle of the night and he sees a nurse hovering above his bed. The next morning, when he checks out, the clerk asks him, "How was your night?" And he said, "Well, I saw this woman above me." And the clerk happened, he said, well, this spot is known to have some activity. And he showed him a scrapbook from throughout the years. And sure enough, he shows him a picture from around 1917, right after World War I, because there was an outbreak as sailors and soldiers were coming back from World War I. They brought back with them Spanish flu, influenza. And so the previous establishment at that time had to close up. And so he showed a picture of the staff, and sure enough, he sees that very woman that was looking down at him the night before. And then in DC, we have the Hayes Adams Hotel, which carries the spirit of Marion Clover Adams, who is related to Henry Adams, who was the grandson to John Quincy.
Wow. I guess I don't know if you get a good night's sleep. Maybe you will, or maybe you'll be just standing up all night. Sounds like fun,
Right.
though.
I've had guests who stayed there, and they haven't given me. I always say, send me back, let me know how your night was, and I never hear back. Good or bad, I don't know.
I guess I have this one last question. We've got the election coming up. Are there any election ghost stories? I don't know if there's something related. It just kind of popped into mind at Washington, D.C. It seems like the White House is kind of a hot spot.
Okay. Well, yes, there is, as a matter of fact. And we're gonna go back to Baltimore for this story. Okay. Because Edgar Allan Poe. Now, there is quite a mystery surrounding Poe's death. There always been. In fact, it was early October 3rd, 1849, that Poe was found there in the streets of Baltimore. Theories throughout the years have been of rabies, the critters throughout. There's been theory of murder, but the one is the theory of cooping. And what cooping was, it was election day, that October 3rd, 1849. And there was a practice back then where they would take gentlemen off the streets, they would take the vagrants, and often said they would liquor them up, sometimes drug them, and they would take them to the voting polls, and they would have them vote for their candidate, and then they would change his appearance, have him vote again. And the reason it was called cooping was because these men were kept in what was like a chicken coop. And so they believe that Poe becomes victim to this. Now, Poe left late September from Richmond. He was never supposed to go up to Baltimore. And so they believe that he was one of the victims of this scheme. And what's fascinating, what's also interesting about this is around that time, the president, now the election had already been held, but the president that time was Zachary Taylor with the Whig Party. And it was said that this scheme had something to do with the Whig Party. After Poe died in 1849, in 1850 was July 4th. And there is Zachary Taylor in D.C. Whether or not he was involved in the scheme, we don't know. But there he is in D.C., and he is celebrating the 4th of July. The Washington Monument at that time was just 1/3 built. You might see how there's two different shades to it because they lost the funding for a while. And so they were trying to build some money up to continue the building. But there is Zachary Taylor at this 4th of July party, and he was seen consuming large amounts of cherries and drinking ice cold milk. Now, ice cold milk, that was a luxury item in that time, to be able to have cold milk on a hot July day. But then Zachary gets a tummy ache. Now, I don't know if he was at the Decatur house, but he gets a bad stomach ache. He's laid up in bed, and he dies several days later. And so there are theories that he was murdered. But then others believe it was the large amount of cherries he ate, for they have a little bit of arsenic.
Interesting. Wow. Great. I love it. Those are some great stories, both for time of the year, also time of the year, both. Yeah, Halloween, and we've got the election coming up. Thank you so much, John. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate your time. Like I said, I love these stories. I think they're fascinating. And I'll share the links where everybody can get in touch with you and hopefully join you on one of the tours, Baltimore, DC. Great part of the world to see some creepy things and maybe get a drink on a pub crawl.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much again.
Thank you for having me.
I'm going to continue with the creepy voice for the outro. Thank you, John, for being a guest on the foXnoMad podcast, and thank all of you for listening. Make sure you give this episode a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts, a like and subscribe on YouTube. Otherwise, you might piss off the spirit world, and that's never any fun. So the way to protect yourself from ghosts and hauntings and spirits is to give this episode a 5-star rating and a couple of kind words on Apple, Google, wherever you listen to podcasts, Spotify, and a like and a subscribe on YouTube. Thank you all for listening. Thank you again, John, for being a guest on the podcast, and I'll talk to you all in the next episode.